So I know what it's like. You know what it's like. We want to live that crazy, blessed life, but sometimes things like anxiety get in the way, panic gets in the way. Sometimes just it feels like the whole world is closing in. So I want you to just take a deep breath and understand it's not going to stay this way. It's going to get better, especially after you hear this episode of Crazy Blessed Show, because we've got an amazing guest, Rebekah Lyons, and she's going to tell us how saying yes can lead to something amazing. Rebekah, thank you so much for being here with us today on the Crazy Blessed Show.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is so fun. I love talking about this topic, so I can't
See,
wait.
that's so cool. Like when you say, I love talking about this topic, and you're talking about like how we can surrender and say yes. And all of a sudden, out of that, things can change. But people don't really enjoy talking about things like anxiety or frustration or panic attacks, and you're very upfront with that. Like, thank you so much for, first of all, just being raw and real, someone we can really like understand.
Oh, thank you. I kind of think I just grew up a chronic oversharer. And as a result, um, God just gave me a story I couldn't shut up about. And really, it's truly his nearness and his rescue in the middle of one of the most terrifying panic disorder seasons of my life. And so that was about 11 years ago. And thankfully, we've had a 10-year run of recovery or healing journey or whatever that looks like for everybody. But
Hmm.
I wake up every day thankful and I wouldn't trade it because I do think our pain becomes purpose if we let
So good. And it all really is the meaning that we apply to circumstances that can make or break us. But I'm sure people, I mean, maybe they haven't read your book, Surrendered Yes, yet, because they're going to. But can you share a little bit? Because I think some people, like I remember when um, decades ago, when I was had depression, when I had anxiety, I felt like I was the only one in the whole world. Like no
it.
one could be going through this like I'm going through it. So could you share a little bit about your story, just so people who are watching and listening, like, all right, she's legit. Like okay, all right, Rebekah's real. I can like totally like pull my car up against her car. We can travel in this lane together.
Absolutely. Well, I actually never had a history of anxiety personally that I was aware of. And I think that's what's interesting is it takes all shapes and sizes and different forms. And really on the continuum of mental health, you think of everything that begins with like some stress and chronic overscheduling and busyness and hurry. But that can really go all the way towards extreme disorders that debilitate you and cripple you and make you shrink back and become a shell of who you were. So I think I've run the gamut of that, but I wasn't aware of the fact that at 26 we gave birth to our firstborn son. He was failure to thrive, 39 weeks, only 4.5 pounds, didn't grow the last trimester. I had emergency C-section because his heart rate was down in the 60s. I felt like I was dying on the table because I had two epidurals within 30 minutes, and so it went into a high block where I couldn't breathe. And essentially, I never held him. And then he was whisked away to the NICU, and the doctor comes in 6 hours later and says, "We see signs of Down syndrome in your baby." And so that was my entree to motherhood. That was the first day that I became like full blown, like I am now. I have a baby, and I felt like a baby myself. I'm 26, and I would just say that day was a traumatic day that I do think yielded for the next decade of like carrying a lot of stress. So Cade had RSV. He was in the NICU until he got to 5 pounds. He didn't latch on for 10 weeks. Then he would have croup attacks where we'd rush to the ER in the middle of the night just to get him an epinephrine shot because a lot of airways for Down syndrome kids are smaller. So I didn't know then that like, hey, this is not a normal way to begin parenting.
Right.
And not that any way is not traumatic. I mean, there's all the unknowns in being
Oh
a first
yeah.
time mom, but this just kind of doubled down. And then as he grew, he would start to run off, and he was very what we call like he would explore, and he was not lost, but to us he was lost. And so I just remember being a little mom, a young mom with three little kids, because he was four, my son Pierce was two, and my daughter Kennedy was a newborn. And I was at the Mall of Georgia with like a double stroller and then a baby in the sling. And he runs off to, we were in like in the play area, and he went into Hollister and he's dancing in the back
Yeah.
of Hollister to the music. But then I had to get mall security to help find him. And because he was nonverbal, that was always just a massive scare. So all this to say is, I think that with that book that came out a couple years ago, The Body Keeps a Score, is truly that, like, our body is constantly trying to manage and quell whatever the drama, the chaos, the unknowns, the unexpected just ventures into our lives.
Yeah.
And it can do that. Like, the body is high capacity. We've been given strong, able bodies, and they are resilient until
Yeah.
they're not. And so we go to New York City a decade later. We move there full time. At this point now, Cade, my firstborn, is 9, my son is 7, my daughter's 5, and leaving our comfort zone of the South in Atlanta and our community and selling all we had. And we really were going there on mission to kind of do the work we felt like God had invited us into. I had my first panic attack 4 months in, and it
Wow.
began
And
on
4
a
months
plane.
after you moved to New York City.
Yeah, so 9 months,
Okay.
not 9 years after that day Cade was born. It took that long for my body to be like, it, almost like New York became just the straw that broke the camel's back. Like,
I can see that.
we're done. Yeah.
I can definitely see that. Okay, so what was that like? Because some people are like, yes, I've had a panic attack, or I don't even know what that feels like. And sometimes, like, initially, you're like, oh my, what is wrong with me?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what was that like? When did
Well,
you know what was going on, or what? What did that feel like?
no, I did not. Because again, up until that point, I had kind of had the mental toughness when the amygdala like starts firing and you're in
Right.
fight or flight. Like, I kind of knew what to do. I didn't realize I would was in survival mode for so long with
Oh yeah,
Cade. But
yeah.
we get to New York though, and it was like the opposite. It was like my body just shut down. And so I'm on a flight back to
It just had enough. Like, it had just
yeah,
had enough. It was
like
constantly like, imagine your brain is always, always, always protecting. I call it like that situation because we do a lot of research with the mom brain and everything here. But it's almost like, you know how they say, like, when you're scared by a bear, like, the fight or flight. Imagine like what it feels like, what the state you're in was, as if that bear is always walking around your house. And
mhm.
then after a while, it's like, I'm done. I'm checking out.
Yeah, you're right. Like, it's almost like the alarm doesn't even know. So what happened for me, and it looks different for everyone. Mine was rooted in claustrophobia. I didn't have a history of claustrophobia, but mine was rooted in the idea of that when we were on a flight, we're about to land LaGuardia from Atlanta. I'd been in New York at four months at this time. I'm coming back from a trip, about to land at midnight and a ton of turbulence hit. And maybe that just triggered a fear, but it wasn't a fear of, this is what's weird. It wasn't a fear of crashing and dying. It was a fear of claustrophobia that whenever this plane lands, I will not be able to get off fast enough. It's kind of like the fear makes you kind of run, right? So fight,
Right,
flight, or
right.
freeze. So the only thing I was feeling at that moment is I have nowhere to go. I feel trapped and powerless. And so I start running towards the front of the plane while everyone's doubling down on their seatbelts, and the sweet flight attendant's like, "What are you doing?" She's buckled in. I run to the front of the plane and I just say panic, and I collapse at the front of the plane. And what began that day continued for about 18 months in planes, trains, elevators, subways, and crowds. Anytime I was in a trapped space that got too crowded and felt like there was um, a, a threat of not having anywhere to go or no escape, then I literally, it would take over. My heart would beat out of my chest. I would start to, I couldn't find my voice. Tears would start to fall. It was so much of a visceral physical thing that it wasn't like, oh, I feel anxious and my chest is tight. It was like, it was so debilitating, I couldn't even function. I
Wow.
started avoiding all those places. I tried to claw the doors back open of the subway or reopen the doors of an elevator. I would take 9 flights of stairs to avoid elevators. It just became that debilitating over that next year.
Wow. That's amazing. Like, all of a sudden, like, that response shut off. And now that, and this is where most people get, is they operate in avoidance. And so you went there to avoidance, but I think what happened was you realized, do I really want to live this way?
Yeah.
What happened as a result of that?
Well, when we had just moved to the city, right, you can't avoid those places and
Oh,
those
no.
things. So I got a lot of walking in. I would need to be on a train that would take like a 20-minute trip, and I would just start walking, and sometimes it would take an hour, which is really good for your mental health. Actually, it's very grounding to walk through Central Park. I lived on the east side. I needed to go to the west side. The train goes around and below the side, so I would just walk through. That actually was a good thing. But in general, what I did find is that when I would avoid all those places, what I've studied now about any phobia, but especially claustrophobia is an example of that, is the best way to combat claustrophobia is through exposure.
Mhm.
It's like you have to retrain your brain
You
that
do.
whatever that
Yeah.
happened on that flight does not mean you will die.
Right.
And if you're caught in an elevator and the door won't open, that doesn't mean you'll die. But you won't, you can say that all day long, but if
But
you
your
don't
brain believes it.
yeah, if you don't experience the counter memory, because it's still all emotions are triggering you back to a memory. It's
Right.
not that they're
Right.
based in truth. It's like an experience formed what you
Yeah.
believe about something, and your
Yeah.
brain is now telling you it's true. So the
Yeah.
neuroplasticity of healing the brain says you have to go back and do that over and over. Fortunately, God met me still in that place through crying out to him. And I remember one night in particular in September, I was flooded with peace. And then I was like, I felt like I almost got a leg up. You know what I mean? Like you're in
Yeah.
a hole and somebody at least helped pull you out of the hole. Now it's up to
Yes.
you to still
Yeah.
decide, am I going to walk forward or am I going to stand here over by
So
the
good.
side of the hole? So I did have to put rhythms and practices in my life. And then we moved downtown to a high rise where I was 7 floors high with views of the city, so I wasn't feeling trapped, but I did have to get on an elevator every day, and then I had to get on a plane every week to talk about the rescue of God, like to teach across the country
Right.
on my first book. So I do think it is the great irony that the old place of panic became a sanctuary in the sky, but that was only because of neuroplasticity. It was only because of the peace of God. It was
Yeah.
only because there was a hypervigilance to go like, we won't be well unless we do the work and we do it faithfully and diligently. And yes,
Oh,
faith is a huge part of that for me as well.
that is so huge, Rebecca. I just want to like go back to what you said that the healing, first of all, can happen, but we had to be a diligent participant in that healing. And so this is what I think is so powerful. Like, you know how Romans 12:2 says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. The pattern of this world is this creates fear in me. Let me avoid it and protect myself. And then all of a sudden our life starts to shrink. We get smaller, smaller versions of ourselves. But God says we are to show up in the world like salt and light. So now here we have this predicament. How do I move into this place that creates fear for me and be obedient to God when everything I want to do is avoid? But what you shared about how we have the power, and that's that other part of Romans 12 too, to be transformed by the renewing of our mind so we
Yeah.
can test and prove what God's will is, his good, pleasing, perfect will. He wants our lives to be good, pleasing, perfect. So when
Mm-hmm.
we can start to say, all right, God, this scares me,
Mm-hmm.
but I can stick my toe in there and feel the water. And that's all I need to do. Like
Yeah.
when I've worked with people with obsessive compulsive disorder or phobias, like sometimes it's like first of all, let's lift all the judgment.
Yeah,
Because we
for
always think,
sure.
what's wrong with me? I'm broken. I'm always going to be like this. Nothing's ever going to change. Like, let's just like suspend all that just for a while so we can get this new belief in there that I'm not broken
Mm-hmm.
and I can work through this as a diligent participant in the healing process. And I'm so excited for you that you were willing to move into that place because you could have like covered it up, told the world it's not a problem, and continue to live with like such a smaller version of yourself.
Well, the beauty is New York wouldn't let me. I mean, that's a
Ah,
city where you go. That's
yeah,
a city where
instead of
you
moving out of
go.
New York, you're like, okay, I'm here. I gotta
We had
figure it out. I'm here.
we had just gotten there, and I knew the Lord had brought us there. And I would cry and go, this is the hardest season I've ever been in, but I know He has us here. And I wanted to run. And I remember I wanted to run back to Atlanta. I remember walking one day through the Central Park that winter. We were only 6 months in, and all I kept hearing is stay, just stay. Like there is something I have on the other side of this yes, right? This surrendered yes of stay. I don't want to stay. Like sometimes stay, it feels like the hardest thing to do when all you want to do is run back to some comfort, some familiarity, some version of your personal self preservation. But God, what He was doing, I had no idea then ever that I would write, ever that I would teach, ever that I'd be an advocate for mental health. And it was just not even on my radar. God's like, you have no idea. Like, I am with you right now. I'm walking with you. I'm carrying with you. I'm going to give you the grace for today. That's all you need today.
Today.
And that I think is what overwhelms us sometimes is we just rather pull out and just numb out and go like, hey, you are walking through the valley of a shadow of death right now. That doesn't mean you're camping there, making your home there. It's your new identity. It's like you are
Right.
walking through
Yeah.
something. And Winston Churchill says, if you're walking through hell, keep walking.
Just
You
keep
know,
walking.
eventually that darkness will lift. And I
Right.
kind of took some voices of people who I've watched be overcomers in centuries before us and go like, I'm not the first person who's experienced a hardship or a trial or something that's debilitating.
Wow.
Let me learn from those who've gone before me, and the heroes of the faith through scripture. I mean, God just kept me going. And in some ways, honestly, I look back now and there was one turning point that I'm going to share really quickly, because I do think I don't talk about this hardly ever, and it was catalytic for me. So what happens when you have a panic thing and it takes and consumes your body? You become afraid of you. You're not even afraid of the fear anymore.
Ooh.
You're afraid of yourself when you feel that out of control. And so
Wow.
I had to get back on a plane to fly to my aunt's funeral. And it was the first time I had done since the very first panic attack. And I remember flying back, we were going back at midnight. It was almost like a replay of what had just happened a few months prior. And I felt the anxiety start to do physically what it had done the first time, that very first time on a plane, where it takes over, the heart beats out of the chest. It's like literally consumes you. And what I did is I let it happen, but in my mind, in my thoughts, I visualized my aunt seeing Jesus face to face, their eyes making contact for the very first time, like her kind of crossing that threshold to being with Jesus. And as I like stayed there, the panic rolled over my entire body and then subsided within about
Oh,
90 seconds. And I stayed internally because my eyes were fixed on Jesus and her connecting for the very first time. My body, my mind, and my inner life stayed perfectly calm. And what I think happened in that moment was like Jesus was with me in that panic moment, going, hey, if you lock eyes with me, if you don't lose focus with me,
right.
I'm going to walk you through this, and you're going to realize that this is a bully and it's a tactic to take you out. You're more afraid of the fear than you are the actual thing you think you're afraid of. But if you fix your eyes on me, and I go back to the verse, I will keep her in perfect peace, whose mind is fixed on me because she trusts in me. And that is exactly what I was doing. I wasn't consciously doing it. I was just like, I'm just going to think about this. And then as a result, it lost power. It's hard to
Yes.
explain. It's just like all of a sudden I was like, oh, that can
But you're
happen.
not resisting it. You're not
Yeah, you're
because
just letting
if
it.
we resist anxiety, it just makes it stronger. Like, oh no, oh no, oh no, I don't want to feel this. I don't want to feel this. It just makes it more powerful. But if
Yeah.
you're like, okay, what if I am bulletproof? What if I'm waterproof? What if I'm like, it's just going to roll? And I love how
Mhm.
you like even did the hands, like it just rolls.
Yeah.
So it can come on me.
Top of my head to the soles of my feet. It like
That's right.
literally rolled through my body like a wave. It was
Wow.
unbelievable. Yeah.
So amazing. And we discover, like, I don't think we can ever discover what we're made of. Like we are the temple of God Almighty. Like he
Mhm.
resides in us. And I don't think we can ever really understand the impact of that in a place of safety and comfort. It's when we're in that place that it's like, I'm going to step out in the storm and find out that I am waterproof. I'm going
Yeah.
to step into the line of fire and realize I'm bulletproof. And then it just like becomes, like you said, powerless
Mhm.
because it is impervious. That fear cannot enter into that love.
Yeah.
The two
So
cannot
good.
exist simultaneously. So the fear
It's so
has to
true.
just roll off. But
Yeah.
and it's so hopeful for people who, maybe they're listening or watching today. They're like, yeah, it terrifies me. And they know exactly what you mean when you say you become afraid of you.
Mhm.
I don't want to feel that.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
not
It's like that
no, go ahead. Yeah.
that out of control place is like, I'm not going to go anywhere where I'm afraid of even myself, of
Mm,
what my body's doing. It was that visceral. I mean, I can't. it was that like, oh, that girl, whoever she was, I don't ever want to know her or see her again. I want to run as far and fast from her. I will medicate whatever I need to avoid her, because there's something that she tapped into that I am not going to engage. And truly what it was for me was this ultimate surrender of God, like, you're all I got. You are all I got in this
Yeah.
90 seconds of terror. And it doesn't even make logical sense when you come out of it. Like, I can't believe I felt like I was being held at gunpoint. That's what I felt. My body was acting as
Yeah.
if I was being held at
Same
gunpoint in
thing.
a
You
panic
think
room.
you're gonna die.
But it that's what the brain does. I mean, that's
Yeah.
how deceived we can become when it just takes over. And I have so much empathy for people who are so debilitated by it. And of course, you would do everything possible to avoid all those places that would even begin to make you feel like that. But I do think there is something to saying, I'm going to actually say no, like, not on my watch. I refuse to succumb to this tsunami of fear. And if it
So,
comes, come what may, I will still be standing. And Galatians 6 was a huge gift to me, that when you put on the full armor of God,
yeah.
that when the strategies or the tactics of the enemy come,
Yeah.
if you put on the full armor, every piece, you will still be standing firm. And that was my promise. It's like, Rebekah, you could apply that to every area of life that are hard. Whatever it comes at you that's trying to take you out, if you put on the full armor, you will still be standing firm. And in the end, I'm like, is there a greater joy than to go, hey, that actually didn't take me out. Instead,
Yeah.
it just got me more loud. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Um,
Well, that's what,
Praise
because
God.
the Bible says that we will use the enemy as our footstool. So now what he tried to trip you up with, now you used to just elevate yourself and
Mm,
say, you know what, I'm going to show up. I'm going to show up with the glory of God in me, on me, operating through me. And it's so powerful, because then what can stand against you? Like, there's thousand falling at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it can't come on you. It just can try, it can just roll over you. And
mm.
that's so powerful. What would you say to someone like, I love your book, Surrendered Yes, because it's like you were trying to fight so hard against being in that place. But then when you're like, you know what if I walk into that place with you, God? What
Yeah.
does that look like? To say yes to you, to say
Yes.
yes to me, to say yes to my future, to say yes to all these things. And I want to encourage people who are feeling this way to just be able to say, you know what, nothing can overpower me when I know what's in me. But what would you say to someone? I want to make sure we touch on this, who are feeling the way you
Mm,
felt then, and they're thinking, I just need to avoid that. I
yeah.
feel like I need to run away, and I don't ever want to be in that place of terror again. What would you say
Yeah.
to them?
Nobody wants that. And I get it. I didn't have my next, after that season, I didn't have a panic attack again for 7 years. And I began my book, Rhythms of Renewal, the one before this, with that story. And I was locked in a bathroom on a 100-year-old home on Carmel on the coast. Nobody was going to be back for an hour. My phone died. And everything rose in me as if no healing had happened.
Wow.
And I look up, I'm in this tiny cell, and there's this tiny little window above the toilet, and I'm like, are the hips going to fit through that window? And thankfully it opened. I got out of the window. It was like squeezed. But I was like trembling, because again, 7 years had gone by where I hadn't experienced it, and that terror was the worst one I'd ever had. And I said to God, am I a fraud? I've taught of like healing journey. I've prayed for people. People have come out of these things. Like, you've been such a rescuer. And then look at me. And I couldn't make sense of it that whole day. And that night, as I laid on the bed, I looked up, I said, Lord, what was that about? Like, and it was so clear. It said, I don't promise. And this is to the person who's in it right now. I don't promise that fear won't come knocking, but I always promise a way of escape. And this idea here is exactly what happened on that flight about my aunt, was that you still might have some
Yeah.
relapse moments in life, because
Right.
the enemy was going to want to do to you what he did to Eve. Did God really mean that you're free? Did God really mean that he has your plans and your purposes for his good and his glory? Like, does he really intend for you to be fully healed? For me, it was like this tempter going, look, you've come nowhere. you're a fraud. In 7 years time, you're back where you were. And God
Wow.
was like, no, 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 no. This is to remind you that no matter what trial you continue to face, because Jesus clearly says, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So the promise is this: as long as we have breath, there will be trials in our lives. We are not going to be able to run and hide from every hard thing that
Right.
comes our way. We know that. But what God is more intimately saying is that even in those places, I will be with you. I will never leave you or forsake you. And I will always make a way of escape so that you can bear the hardest thing maybe that comes your way that you've ever seen or known. And then all of a sudden, that intimacy and communion with God's nearness becomes the prize, and it counters whatever hard thing we're in right now, or what might be coming around the bend that we don't know is coming. And that's how I have to look. Like, of course, it's going to still have hard days, but God is going, I'm going to make a way of escape. I am your escape. I am your peace. I
Yeah.
am, Jesus, like, come under my covering of peace. I'll be your peace. Invite me into that place of fear and terror, and just say, God, Jesus. So I do this on flights. Jesus, I come under your covering of peace. I submit to you. You are my peace. And if you are making your home in me, then I carry peace. And I'll just meditate on scriptures on peace. And I have verses on my site, like 30 verses for anxiety. And I print those out and I have them in my, so it's just like having all the tools. It's almost like we need a field guide for fear
Yeah,
to
you
always
do.
had on us at all times, knowing that, like, yeah, you'll get tripped up here and there, but it only makes you stronger. And it doesn't mean that you can't keep going.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I love the classic amplified version of that where it says, in this world you will have trouble, but I have come that you may have peace. But he says, I have deprived the world of the power to harm you. Like, I love
Mm.
that version. Like, in this
Oh,
world
it's
you have
so
trouble,
good.
but take joy
Yes.
because I've
Yes.
deprived it of power to harm you. And
Yes.
sometimes I like to think, like, I'm a very visual person, and I think you are
Mhm.
too, like just being able to imagine solutions for us in that moment. But sometimes I feel like anxiety is like this balloon,
Mhm.
and when Jesus is depriving it, he's like just holding it open, and it's just like, it's like all
Yeah,
deflating. Like, I've deprived it of power. Now, is you're looking at this little flimsy, deflated balloon because
totally.
he let all that pressure off. So that's so powerful. And thank you so
Mhm.
much for not just sharing your story, but also with your book, Surrendered Yes, helping so many people not avoid, but just learn how to travel through. And I love how you say, like, that fear field guide, like, we
Mhm.
can actually go through this with joy. We take the joy. But
Yeah.
thank you so much, Rebecca.
Oh, it is my joy. Thank you so much for having me.
It is such a blessing. I'm telling you, when you practice this field guide to fear, you don't have to be afraid of anything. You can go anywhere, you can do anything because you know you're not going to go in it alone. He has promised to never leave you, never forsake you. And with a promise like that, you are going to be blessed like crazy.